Hey everyone, Galore here. What I want to do is go through some of the basics of looking at logs and using logs effectively and finding the information that's going to be most personally useful to you. This is the kind of stuff that doesn't have to do with parses, doesn't have to do with rankings, doesn't have to do any with that. It's really about finding the kind of information that you need to fulfill your personal goals with your character. Doesn't matter what role you are, DPS, tanks, heals, all of that. This is about seeing how you're doing at the thing you want to personally improve on. So to do this, we are going to use this Wednesday's Throne of Thunder logs, and we're going to walk you through finding the information on 3 different kinds of things that are probably most commonly related to the goal you have for yourself. The first is looking at your casts and your damage or healing done by ability. The second is how to look at uptime for buffs or debuffs that are critical to your personal performance. And the third is looking at damage taken history, which will help you evaluate how you're doing with regards to personal responsibility mechanics, things like that. And at the end, I'll also show you a handy trick to compare windows, which can help you track how you're doing with things like personal defensives and cooldowns. All right, so let's get into it. As I said, the first thing we're going to do is look at casts and damage or healing done by ability. So you can obviously pick any fight. For the purposes of this guide, we're going to pick our Jikun kill because that fight has a good mix of demands on everyone. So I'm going to click on the fight. I'm going to click on myself, and then I'm going to click on damage done, and it gives me a breakdown of damage done by every ability throughout the fight. If you click on one ability specifically, it'll give you a new window that just shows that ability only during the entire fight. You can also remove abilities from the bar here by clicking on them, but that can be a little bit more time consuming. So one thing you should also be sure to look at here is the list of abilities. Sometimes you have duplicates. For example, me as a fire mage, I have 2 abilities called Living Bomb. One is the dot and one is the explosion, and so I need to be careful that I'm not mixing them up. Same thing with combustion. There's the cast versus the dot for that too. And another useful thing you can do here is you can filter it by the enemy that you damaged. So let's say that you're in a fight where, it has lots of ads, for example, but damaging them isn't as important as damaging the boss. What you can do is you can click on the drop arrow down by all enemies, and I am going to click on Jikun here because I just want to look at boss damage, let's say, instead of the damage to like the eggs or the hatchlings and all that. I click on Jikun. Now it gives me the damage window, and you'll see on the targets here, it's only Jikun, right? It's not talking about me hitting any of the ads. So it can be useful there to help, look at what might matter more, right? You might have a fight where you did a whole lot of damage, but if you weren't hitting the right things, you actually didn't do as well, right? You might parse really high, but that's not really your goal. So for healing, let's go back to the fight, and let's out of here on the summary. So let's look at it from a healer's perspective. I'm going to pick shift, and instead of going to damage done, I'm going to go to healing. If you are a healer that focuses more on shields, for example, like a disc priest or something like that, you can it lumps healing and absorbs together, but you can remove healing here to look at just your shielding if you would like. But like the damage, I've got a list of all of my heals throughout the fight, how often they were up, things like that. And then I can also similarly filter out who I healed. So let's say, for example, that my job was to heal the tank. I don't really know, what this fight was like, but for the sake, for an example, I'm going to pick Cathis here. So I click on the drop-down arrow under all friendlies, click on Cathis, and now I see only the heals that I did to Cathis throughout the fight and how much I healed her. So that's another way to cut through some information to get at something more specific that might be more useful to you. The next thing we're going to do is look at buff and debuff uptime and how to gauge how well you're doing at that, because those things are super important to the performance and output of lots of classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the summary. I'm going to X off of Shiftstorm right here so I get back to everybody else. I'm going to go back to myself, and I'm going to click on buffs. So right here, you'll see the list of buffs I got throughout the entire fight. They are split up according to category, group cooldowns, individuals, damage buffs, there's defensives further down, etc. I am going to look at damage buffs. So let's say my goal is to improve my evocation buff uptime during fights. It's one of the most important buffs for mages, and I can see it right here at the top of my damage buffs, and it tells me the uptime, which is 83%. Not the best. I could definitely get better at that. And so what I want to do next is say to myself, well, let's take a look at the fight and where it dropped off, see if we can learn anything from that. And I click on the ability. It takes me to this window right here. It gives me a timeline of the buff's uptime throughout the entire fight. And it looks like at the end, I lost it for a moment. Not really sure what was going on there. And I also had a couple gaps here, one of about 11 or 12 seconds, and then one of about 20 or so. So let's say I want to take a look right here. This looks like just before 4 minutes into the fight to about 4:22. And so I'm going to click on replay, which is a fun tool. It's going to pull up the replay, give me the map of the boss fight. And I'm going to, on the bottom, go along the timer bar here, and it dropped off at about 4 minutes or so, and so I'm going to select about there on the timer bar. It'll fast forward to that time in the fight. I'm going to look for my icon. If you're curious as to what your icon is, it's up here at the top. I'm a little fireball because I'm a little fire mage. And it looks like I was right here at the time, and I was at one of the upper nests fighting some of the eggs and hatchlings. And so what probably happened was that I forgot to refresh my evocation buff on myself before flying up to the nest, and it fell off while I was helping kill the hatchlings up here. And so what that did was, it meant we were killing the hatchlings slower, which meant that I was getting down to start DPSing the boss again slower, and that's all bad stuff. So next time I have a very clear actionable step for myself. Hey, make sure that you refresh your evocation buff before you start flying up to the nest. Pay good attention to the timer on your DBM, and make sure that you have a buff that's going to last you when you're up there so you can get back down and start DPSing the boss again quicker. So that's how you can look at specific buffs. I know it looks different for every class, but let's now look at debuffs instead. Let's say your goal is, instead of keeping a buff up on yourself, to keep a debuff up on the boss. So I'm going to go back to the boss kill. I'm going to go back to the summaries page, exit out of myself, and what you want to do to check debuffs on the boss is, you see how friendlies is highlighted here. Click on enemies, and right here you'll see the list of enemies. I'm going to click on Jikun, and I'm going to click on debuffs, and it gives me the list of all of the debuffs that Jikun had the entire fight. Now this is a lot. It's way too much to sift through. You know, there's like huge, huge list. So what you can do is you can go to all sources and click the drop down button, and you can pick yourself, and it'll tell you all of the debuffs that you specifically put on the boss the entire fight, right? So this is good if I was looking at, like, you know, living bomb uptime. Obviously some of these, you know, I'm down like killing the nestlings and such. So, you know, that's one thing. Let's say I was like a warlock or something like that, and my goal had to do with keeping debuffs up on the boss. I would pick myself. I'm just going to pick guard, and look at that. It gives me a list of all of my dots and their uptime on the boss. And so, you know, that's another thing you can do if a debuff on the boss or something else is your goal. You can see how you were doing there, and if there were any huge drop-offs here, you would just go back to the replay and say, hey, what was I doing then that caused me to forget to reapply that debuff that was really important. And the last thing we're going to look at is how to look at your damage taken and how you might be either doing raid mechanics well or not so well, the kind of stuff that relies more on you personally to just not stand where you don't want to stand, and make life easier on the healers. So to do this, we'll go back to the summary, go back to friendlies, so we're at the starting screen again. I'm going to click myself, and then I'm going to go to damage taken. And so again, this gives me the damage taken throughout the entire fight. I can see if there's any instances where it's spiking pretty heavily. And what I want to do here is, you can look here and see, am I taking anything from like, am I standing in the pools or the slime too much? And it always looks different depending on the fight. But what I want to show you at the end here is something that's a little nifty, is to look at how you might be using your own defensives. So let's say I have a goal of using my defensives more consistently on quills, because you can see that's like by far and away the most damage I take during this fight is quills that hits everything in the raid. So I'm going to click on quills, and it'll put all the instances of me taking quills damage up there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little plus sign right here. And what that is going to do is that is going to stick this window at the top and allow me to navigate elsewhere while keeping this up. So what I can do is I can then go to casts, my own personal casts. I can go to my defensive, which is Temporal Shield. I can click that. And now I have this nice little comparison graph. I can see when I'm using it and whether or not it's lining up with the ability or the time period that I should be using it on. So I can see right here, here's one quills. I use it here. I use it for something else here. I've got it up here, so good. Good here. This one's good. I used it a little bit early here, right? I probably used it like before quills was starting to be cast rather than like after it was cast. So I messed it up a little bit there, but then the last one was good. And you can do this with anything, as far as like sticking the windows in your window here. So you can play around with it. Hopefully all of these have been helpful things for you to learn if you didn't know it already. These are great ways to use logs to look back at what you're doing and help you achieve your goals. I'll see you in the next raid.